Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
My guest this week is Joey Coleman. Joey helps companies from around the world keep their customers. An award-winning speaker and best-selling author, he works with companies ranging from small startups to major brands such as Deloitte, Hyatt, Zappos, and Whirlpool. His first 100 days methodology fuels the remarkable experiences his clients deliver and dramatically improves their profits. His Wall Street Journal #2 best-selling book, Never Lose a Customer Again, offers strategies and tactics for turning one-time purchasers into lifelong customers. When not speaking to audiences around the globe, Joey enjoys spending time with his amazing wife and 2 young sons in the mountains of Colorado. Here's my chat with Joey Coleman. Welcome, Joey. It's a pleasure to have you on the speaker station.
Well, it's great to be here, Peter. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Before we get into your speaking career and sharing advice that can help our listeners, tell us a little bit about your best-selling book, Never Lose a Customer Again.
Well, I appreciate you asking. In my experience, most companies spend a lot of time, effort, and money focused on customer acquisition. How do we market? How do we sell? How do we fill a funnel? How do we get new customers to join our business and do business with us? And yet very few companies spend much time, money, or effort on customer retention. What do we do with those folks who've already raised their hand and said they want to be in business with us to keep them in the fold, to continue to serve them, to continue to have the opportunity to do business with them? In writing the book, I recognized that somewhere between 20 and 80% of new customers will decide to stop doing business with you before the 100-day anniversary.
Wow.
And I thought that was absolutely staggering, right? Here are all these new customers that have said they want to be in relationship, and they're leaving almost as quickly as we're bringing them in the front door. And so what I set out to do was to create a framework, methodology, and philosophy for how to think differently about customer experience and how to really focus on the time period after the sale and what you could do to keep customers coming back for more. And so what we found out is if you focus on those first 100 days and walk customers through a customer journey that is filled with remarkable touch points, you can help navigate a customer through a long-time relationship with you. In fact, if you get to day 101 and the customer is still feeling fantastic about the relationship, the typical customer will stay for 5 years. And so there's no period in the customer relationship that is more valuable, is more dispositive of the lifetime value of the customer than those first 100 days. And so the book's filled with 46 case studies from companies small, medium, and large from around the world to give readers an idea of how to do this and how to implement it in their own business practice.
Well, I'll give you a case study right here of a very small company, and it's mine.
Okay.
I realized when I was reading the book that if I have a workshop, say, and people are registering for that workshop a couple of months out, they didn't hear from me again until the day of the workshop. When I look back, I'm like, how could I have done that? It's obvious once you brought it to light that I'm missing a great opportunity here. Not only to stay in touch with the customer and stay top of mind, but what I found out was once I was top of mind, they were bringing people in. They were referring people to register because I was top of mind as opposed to them registering, forgetting all about it until they were notified a few days out. So thank you to you.
Oh, well, my pleasure. Thank you, Peter, for not only sharing the story, but taking the action. You know, when I wrote the book, I really tried to create something that would drive people to take action on the ideas and the suggestions in the book. And hearing stories like that is just music to my ears. You know, it's not altogether odd that this was your experience in the sense that most folks have heard of the concept of buyer's remorse. So I get the chance to speak to audiences around the world. And one of the things I always ask is, raise your hand if you've heard of buyer's remorse. And literally every hand in the room goes up, audience after audience. And then I say, great, how many of you have a system and a process in your business designed to address the buyer's remorse that your customers are feeling? And not many hands ever go up.
It's easier to ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. And I get it. It's hard. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. It's difficult to run a business. We spend so much time chasing and getting the customer that keeping the customer feels like an afterthought. The problem is most customers think of it as an afterthought of the business as well, right? Customers feel neglected after the sale, which is why they leave. And if we spend a little bit of time and effort, and I imagine you'd agree, it wasn't a ton of time and effort that it required on your part. It was just a communication here or there to remind them that you were still there, they still mattered, and that you were looking forward to have them come to the workshop that you were going to be hosting in the future. Not only did it make them feel appreciated, but so much so that some went the extra step of finding other potential customers for you. And that's what happens when we take care of our customers. They become our best salespeople.
They really do. It's something looking back that's obvious, but it's great when someone brings it to light, shows you through other case studies, here's how it worked, and you say, okay, I've got this idea. You implement it. Key right there that you actually implement it, and then it worked. Awesome. I couldn't thank you enough.
Oh, well, my pleasure. And thank you not only for, like I said, implementing, but sharing the story as well. That's fantastic.
Well, I'll tell you what I really liked about the book that helped me implement it. And it was at the end of every chapter, you said, put down the book. And if I can remember right, after you said, put down the book, it was, nope, actually put it down now. Don't keep reading. Do this particular task, as opposed to waiting till you hit the end of the book and coming back and trying to do all these tasks together. And that really helped.
I'm so glad to hear that helped. It's funny. I love reading books, right? And I read a lot of nonfiction and a lot of business books in particular. And I think one of the challenge with many business books is they give you good ideas, but by the time you get to the end of the book, you've got so many ideas, it's a little difficult to think about how to implement. And so I really tried to structure the book with implementation that happened as you went along. Kudos to you for being the kind of person that took my tongue-in-cheek charge of, no, really, put it down. No, I can tell you're still reading. You should have put it down by now, to have that type of interaction. Because what I found is that the folks who do that get much more benefit from the book than those who just read or listen all the way through, right? It's just the nature of the beast. This is a systematic process that each chapter kind of builds on the previous chapter. And so being able to have you make the adjustments and the kind of the changes in your business and the enhancements in your business as you go through the book really not only accelerates the learning and the impact, but it creates for a much more significant impact when you're completed the book and everything's in place and you're off to the races.
Well, I highly recommend it, and I encourage our listeners to get it, whether it's the hard copy or on Audible. Do those exercises. Come up with ways to stay in touch with people. It's made a difference for me. I know it makes a difference for others, and I'm sure they'll get the same results. Now let's talk a little bit about your speaking. You have an incredibly diverse background. How'd you get into speaking?
Well, I appreciate you being so polite and referring to it as diverse. Some look at my career and are like, geez, can this guy hold a job? He seems to jump from one task or one profession to the next. It's interesting. I've been a speaker really my entire life. I grew up the son of a criminal defense lawyer, and I often joke to folks, my dad was judge, jury, and executioner when it came time to if I wanted to go out on Friday night. So I was persuading juries from a very young age if I wanted to be able to go and do things. I think all kids are really great speakers and really great negotiators. Somewhere along the line, we decided to kind of hammer that out of them and not feel as confident about our speaking abilities, but we all have the ability inside us. I was on the high school speech and debate team. In college, I sang with a group where I was doing a lot of announcements and presentations for that. In law school, I was on the mock trial board and the moot court board and the alternative dispute resolution board. And so I competed nationally and internationally for the school representing those various teams. And so by the time I actually became a criminal defense lawyer after law school, I had already given over 4,000 speeches. And I define a speech as me standing in front of an audience, speaking for more than 5 minutes, where they came to the room to hear my speech. So me giving a toast at a wedding, for example, doesn't count because that's not why they're there. They're there for the wedding, not for the toast. And so I had already done a lot of speaking when I later in my career decided that I wanted to become a full-time professional speaker.
If you can remember way back when, what was your biggest challenge? Did you have any?
Well, oh yeah. Are you kidding me? I still have challenges all day, every day, Peter. I mean, I think the biggest challenge is that I continue to face. I mean, in the beginning, it's how do I find gigs and getting on stage, and how do I wrestle my own nervousness and my own fears, and what am I going to speak on, et cetera, et cetera. Thousands and thousands of speeches later, those considerations and concerns haven't changed that much. They've just increased in severity, right? So before it was, how am I going to, give this speech in front of a room of other people on debate teams from other schools? Now it's, okay, I'm going to walk on stage in front of a room of 6,000 people, and I have 40 minutes to convince them to take action and change how they think about their customers. So it's just a larger scale. As a shift from my criminal defense lawyer days, I often joke now that the stakes are actually much lower, because it used to be if I misspoke, someone went to prison.
Right.
Now, if I misspeak, maybe I get lower speaker review scores on the feedback sheets, right? I mean, I always want to do a great job, don't get me wrong, but the consequences are a little bit less in many ways. So it allows me to focus more on the overall impact without the worry that if something goes wrong, somebody goes to prison.
Huge difference there. Huge
Big difference in the emotional takeaway. Now, to be very clear, I still take the job very seriously. I want my audiences to love their time with me and to really take action like you did from the book. I mean, I approach my speaking in many ways of a similar vein that I do my book, in the sense that I believe there are three types of speakers. I think there are speakers that make you think differently, speakers that make you feel differently, and speakers who make you act differently. And while I certainly hope that my audiences think and feel differently after they have a chance to hear me speak, if they don't act differently, I don't feel like I've earned my fee as the keynote speaker. So I'm always looking for, how can I position my message and my content in a way that is relevant to the audience, that they are compelled to pay attention to what I have to say, and that they are desirous of taking action after the talk to put the things we've talked about into practice. So that's definitely the bar that I'm trying to clear every time I take the stage.
It's a worthy bar.
Well, I appreciate that. It keeps it exciting for me, and hopefully exciting and engaging for the audience as well.
Well, I believe it's all about the audience, but let's face it, if it's not exciting and it's not something that any speaker wants to really work at, it's never going to be good for the audience.
Very true. Very true. I think of speaking as a profession. It's not for the folks who have decided that they want to stand in front of others, they should come to it as artists. They should come to it as a craft, as a profession, as a calling. Lots of people have to give speeches as part of their job, and let's be candid, they see it as a task. And there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not saying that everyone should approach it as a profession. But what I am saying is that the more you focus on honing the craft of speaking, and the more you pay attention to what the audience's reactions are and how they're interacting with your content and what your purpose of being on stage in front of them is, the better the presentation, the better the speech, and the better the experience, not only for the audience, but for the speaker as well.
What's your favorite part about speaking in front of others?
Oh, it's interesting. There's so many things that I love about it. If pressed, I would say my favorite part is walking on stage and getting into the speech and feeling the energy of the audience coming back. I liken this to almost surfing an energetic wave. You can take the audience up, you can bring them down, you can make them laugh, you can get quiet and get serious. And you really can create an emotional display and performance for the audience that I just love being part about that. I love giving the audience an experience that doesn't just make them feel good, but encourages and inspires them to think differently and act differently about how they approach their customers and how they design their business interactions.
What do you think the key is to getting that done, taking them on that ride?
I think the key is to recognize the different types of members of an audience you have. right? Depending on the event and depending on the composition of the audience, they're going to have different needs and different desires. Some want to be entertained. Some want to be educated. Some want to be given clear action steps. Some want to be inspired with a bigger picture vision. And so what I try to do when I'm structuring the content of my speeches and the delivery of my speeches is to recognize the different types, to design different parts of the speech to play to their needs. And then, to the best of my ability, wind all those things together into a performance, an orchestra, if you will, that allows everyone to hear the kind of music they want to hear in that moment, but have it all tied together into an overall song or performance or symphony that leaves people saying, wow, I was just part of something special.
Well, your presentation style has been described, as I've seen it, as warm, funny, and inviting. What advice do you have for our listeners when it comes to their presentation style?
Oh, I think presentation style is very important. And the most important piece of it is you have to present in a way that's in alignment with who you are. If you want to be really successful, let me explain what I mean by that. There are many speakers that are really warm and inviting and entertaining on stage. And the second they step off stage, they're anything but. And in my experience, those folks don't really develop long-term careers. Those folks are maybe able to deliver a performance or a show at an event or for a period of time, but doing it day in and day out, year after year, with that type of misalignment is very difficult. I think at the end of the day, the best speakers are the ones who craft their own style. It's kind of like when we see an actor or an actress on the silver screen or on the TV or on the stage. I don't want to be able to tell where they studied acting by their performance. In fact, I don't even want to be able to tell that they're acting. My uncle's a Shakespearean actor and director, and he shared with me years ago, when someone is on stage sleeping, there's two types of performers. There's the one that you look at them on stage and you say, oh, that person's sleeping. There's the other one that you look at the person on stage and you say, that person's sleeping, and I can tell that they're having a dream right now.
Wow.
I strive to be the latter. I try to have people look at it and say, God, this guy loves what he does, and I'm loving being in his presence, learning, because these are things I can apply to my life tomorrow. I'm so glad that I gave him my time, energy, and attention to be part of this experience with him today. So that's the standard I always try to bring to the table. And as I mentioned, it keeps it really interesting and exciting for me as well.
That's great advice, and I hope the people who are listening take that into consideration. So many of us try to be either something we're not, or even worse, someone we're not.
Very true. Very true. And I will tell you, and we've all of your listeners, we've all probably had this experience or a similar experience in our lives when we meet someone and who they're pretending to be just isn't in alignment with reality. Sometimes we figure that out very quickly. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. In my experience, when that person is on stage, the time in which it takes us to figure out that they're out of alignment is compressed and augmented. What I mean by that is it takes less time and the consequence is greater. We've all probably had that experience of being in the audience and seeing someone come on stage and we're just like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. They don't seem to be excited. They don't seem to be engaged. They don't seem to care, or they care more about themselves than the audience. They're not paying attention to the nonverbal and verbal cues they're getting from the audience. And this magical moment of time together with one person in the front of the room on stage performing or presenting quickly goes away when we feel that that person isn't showing up in their best true self. And I think that's, if there was one thing I think speakers could focus on is not losing sight of who they are when they're on stage and who they're trying to be and what they're trying to project.
I always equate it to the rock band or any band, the singer, whomever it may be, who, this might be your 89th performance this year, but for this audience, it's the only one.
Oh, Peter, so true. So true. In fact, if I may, if you'll indulge me, a brief little story. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to sing with the Notre Dame Glee Club, and we traveled to Europe the summer after my sophomore year of college. This was my first time going to Europe. I was thrilled. This was going to be amazing. We were touring around, singing in some of the most impressive cathedrals and basilicas on the European continent. And our first stop was in Rome. And the conductor came to me the day of the big performance, our first show in Europe, and he said, "Joey, I want you to sing the solo in the Ave Maria." Now, this was unbelievable. I felt so honored and so privileged to be able to have this opportunity. I had never sung a solo with the group before. This was the best main stage one could ever hope for. I mean, we're in Rome, for Pete's sake. This was amazing. And we got to the venue. We did our warm-up. We're backstage and we're watching the crowd filter in. And it's about 5 minutes before we go. And I sneak a look out to see this audience that I'm going to get the chance to do a solo for. And there are 7 people in the basilica.
Oh.
7 total. Peter, I was crestfallen. I couldn't believe it. My big debut, and here it was. We had 50 guys on the tour, and there were 7 people in the audience. We outnumbered them 7-1, right? This was ridiculous. And I went back, and there was a guy in the group who's a few years older than me, and he got the group together, and he said, "Guys, I hear the murmuring. I know some of you have looked out and you've seen that here we are on the first stop on our European tour, and it's almost a non-existent audience. But here's the deal. For those 7 people, this is likely the only time they will ever get the chance to hear the Notre Dame Glee Club. Let's make sure that we honor the almost 100 years of history before us, and surely the 100 years of history that will come after us, by giving these folks the most memorable evening of music they've ever experienced in their lives." Well, let me tell you, that changed my focus entirely. And I think of that often when I step out onto the stage now as a professional speaker. It doesn't matter how many people are in the room. This is my moment of time with them. For many of them, this is the only time we will ever be in the same room on the planet in our lives. I want this moment to be magical. I want it to be remarkable, and I want it to be memorable. And that gives me all the juice I need to take the stage and deliver.
That's a great story. And, it's not their fault that they were the only 7 to show up. They shouldn't get a discounted performance because they showed up and others didn't.
Exactly. If anything, they were our customers.
Right.
They're the ones who deserve even more of our performance because they are the ones who did show up. You're absolutely right.
Speaking of great stories, throughout your book, you use relatable stories. What do you see as the power of storytelling?
Oh, the only power I see behind storytelling, Peter, is that it is the oldest form of communication. When the caveman used to huddle around the fire and tell stories. This is millennia old. This is the essence of the human condition. Our ability to create and tell stories that captivate, that intrigue, that entertain, that strike fear, that bring joy. All the different things we can do around the power of story for creating a moment, for creating an experience. I think it is an intrinsic part of any presentation, and a huge opportunity for us to shape the experience. And so I'm a big student of story. I'm a big fan of story. I feel like it's the best way to teach. I feel like it's the easiest and fastest way to learn. And so in my presentations and in my book, telling stories and giving examples is something that's really important to me, because I think it's a great way to not only translate the message and transfer the message into something that's understandable for the listener, for the reader, but it's also a way to make the points portable. What I mean by that is, if I were to say, here are the 6 steps of this process or the 10 steps of this process, and ask you to memorize them, that's one thing. If I were to tell you a series of stories that lets you retell the story and find those 6 steps or those 10 steps in the story every time you tell it, now I've given you a piece of knowledge and a piece of content, a piece of information that you can continue to use long after I've left the stage. So I'm a big fan of using story to shape the overall experience and the key takeaways.
It's one of the big lessons I learned many years ago was the power of storytelling as opposed to just giving people the nuts and bolts. We can't digest nuts and bolts. Stories we can digest, we can internalize, we can remember. I love that about your book where you gave the concept and then you gave an example. And that helped me format in my mind how I could use that concept in my business.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Peter. Yeah. And it's interesting. That's how the concepts came out. It came into the book, right? I would find the stories and then I would reverse engineer and dissect the stories to create the points I was going to make and vice versa. So it wasn't just always, hey, I want to make this point, go find a story. Sometimes it was, here's an amazing story. What point could I make with it? And as going through the writing and the developmental process, that made it interesting for me because it allowed me to go from nuts and bolts up into the story or go from the story down into the nuts and bolts. And being able to move in both directions, was definitely a fun piece of the writing and development process.
Getting people to move, we talked about that a couple of times, implementing what they've learned. There are speakers who, that's what they do. They speak. And then there are speakers who make a difference in people's lives. And the dichotomy is obvious, of course, but what does it take to move a speaker from being just a speaker to one who makes a difference? And I know that in your presentations, you actually have an action plan, right?
I do. I try to get my audiences to take action in the room and afterwards. So depending on where I'm speaking in an event, kind of where my speech falls into the overall structure, sometimes I'll give homework assignments in the speech. Often I'll have downloads that they can get. I'll have them do worksheets. I'll have them come up with an idea and share it with somebody sitting next to them as an accountability partner. So there's a lot of different techniques that one can adopt as a speaker to get the audience more engaged in the action. But I think the distinction to me between somebody who gives speeches and somebody who makes an impact is fairly, there are multiple pieces to the puzzle. So a couple things come to mind. Number one, it goes back to what we were talking about of acknowledging the different types of audience personas in the room. Certain things are going to be more compelling to one audience member than the next. And so how do you navigate the structure and the development of the content? Second of all, what is the pacing of the speech? I don't ask them to take action in the first 2 minutes other than to listen to me, right? Because rapport hasn't been built. We haven't established enough of a framework. Most of the action steps that I recommend in my presentations don't start happening until about halfway into a 45-minute keynote or a 60-minute keynote. So I use the beginning of the presentation to build rapport, to tell stories, to convince them that this is worth paying attention to, that there is a problem, and that I've got a way that can help them out of this problem. Now, if I'm presenting to somebody who doesn't feel like it's a problem, I'm never going to be able to drive them to take action, because there's no reason to take action.
Makes perfect sense.
If I'm presenting to someone and I'm explaining all the facts and figures, but in their own mind, they're saying, yeah, but that doesn't apply to my business. Those are figures from a different business, or that's not the way it works in my company, Joey. And I don't address those objections head on. They're going to be locked up and uninterested in making any shifts or changes in their thinking, let alone their actions. So it really becomes, in many ways, a combination of science and art in how you structure these. Yeah, you want to have the component pieces, but you want to weave them together in a way that it takes the audience on a journey. And the last thing we want to do is ask them to take huge risks at the beginning of the journey. We want to save those choices for later in the journey once they feel more comfortable with their traveling companion, or in this case, the speaker.
Well, as some people say, you can't go in for the kiss too soon. And I think that's what some speakers do.
Very true. Very true. Oh, it's so true, Peter. You can try,
right.
And every once in a while it may work, but then don't let that one time that it worked allow you to think that it's going to work every time. Absolutely not. Pacing matters. And it's one of the things that I find interesting about a lot of speakers. They'll have a 45-minute talk and they'll start out really slow. And then all of a sudden they're speaking faster and they're going through their slides faster and they're rushing at the end. My theory is design a pace. Design the arc of your story and of your presentation. and have points where you're accelerating and have points where you're slowing down. I mean, I kind of, hope that my audiences feel that they're on a bit of a ride, that at times it's going faster and seems more dangerous. At other times it's slowing down and seems safer. At other times we're accelerating in and they don't know what's happening. At other times we're slowing way down and they're having these poignant moments where they realize that the things we're talking about are even bigger than they might have otherwise imagined. Taking them up and down and back and forth and in and out of the presentation, to me, is the job of the speaker. They've been kind enough to give me their time. They've been kind enough to sit in the audience. The sponsor or the event coordinator, the meeting planner, has been kind enough to book and pay me to come present. It's my job to perform. It's my job to give them an experience. And it's not just because I speak on the topic of customer experience. I think that's the responsibility of anybody who has the privilege of standing in front of a microphone.
I agree. Again, it's all about the audience. It's not about us. We're there to take them where they need to go or where we believe our purpose is. If you treat it like a business, if you treat them like your customers, how can you go wrong?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I believe that there are at least three audiences, Peter. There's the audience of people that are sitting in the room listening to you speak. There's the audience of the meeting planner or the event coordinator, the person who helped you wrangle the logistics of you being at the event. And then there's their boss, who's either the head of the company or a board of directors or the association or whoever it is that wrote the check and gave you time on the agenda to come speak. Each of those audiences has different needs. And I'm a big believer in shaping your speaking engagements to address each of those audiences' needs. Because when you do, then you get zealous advocates in each of those criteria or each of those tiers. You get zealous advocates in the audience, you get zealous advocates amongst the meeting planners, and also amongst the senior leadership or the board of directors or the association, whoever the entity was that was kind enough to invite you to present. So I think that's another layer of thinking about speeches of how are you addressing the various audiences and not just the ones who happen to be sitting in the chairs in front of you.
Great insight. And you've given us a lot of insight in our time together. Do you have one last piece of advice?
I would say to be gentle with yourself, fellow speakers, that it is always a work in progress and a work in process, and not to worry about, oh my gosh, every speech needs to be absolutely perfect. They're not going to be perfect. There's no such thing. There are going to be times where, for some reason, the AV gods are not smiling on you and your microphone cuts out. Or times where the audience has just been in a presentation by the speaker before you and they've been lulled into a state of complacency and or irritation. And your job is to try to bring them out of it. Look at this as a real opportunity and a gift. When we are given the chance as human beings to stand in front of another group of human beings with a microphone for any period of time, we should see it as a gift. We should see it as an opportunity. And the more we can be students of the craft and students of the art of speaking and the art of storytelling and the art of persuasion, and combine that with a science of speaking and a science of art and a science of persuasion, the more fun we can have. And let's be candid, if we're not having fun doing it, why are we taking the stage?
Always the truth. Always. We've got to enjoy it for anybody else to get anything out of it. Joey, I really enjoyed listening to how you frame it all.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. And thanks to everybody who made the time to listen. Look, as I say with my audiences, I don't take your investment of time to be a listener to Peter's show lightly. He was kind enough to invite me to come on the show today. You were kind enough to listen to both of us chat. And I really appreciate you doing that. And hopefully there's been an idea or two that you'll be able to apply to your own life, in your own business, in your own career, whether that's as a full-time speaker or as somebody running a business of speaking, right? That is certainly my goal. And if I can ever be of any service or assistance to my fellow speakers out there who are listening, please don't hesitate to call on me, because I believe that speakers need to look out for each other, and always happy to help a fellow speaker in need.
How can they learn more about you, the book, Never Lose a Customer Again, and the services you provide?
Sure. I appreciate the question. So the best way is to find me on my website, joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, Joey, like a 5-year-old you probably know. Coleman, Coleman, like the camping equipment, but no relation, joeycoleman.com. The book is called Never Lose a Customer Again. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, anywhere books are sold. We've got a hardcover copy. We've got a Kindle copy. Or an ebook copy. We also have an audiobook copy, which if you've enjoyed listening to me speak, you might enjoy the audiobook because I narrate it. So if you want to check out the book, I'd greatly appreciate it. I think it can definitely help folks continue to grow and develop their speaking business. I always say the book is applicable to any business that has human beings as customers. That's who it was written for. If you're dealing with humans, it is based on the human condition, why humans do the things they do and what we can do to make them do the things we'd like them to do. So if you get a chance to check out the book or come over to the website and say hi, I'd greatly appreciate it. And thanks again for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here, Joey. I highly recommend the book and your services, and I wish you the absolute best.
Thanks, Peter.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.